forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forever. Amen.
The Senate is in session.
Messages from His Excellency the President.
Honourable Senators, and the receipt of communication from His Excellency the President, which reads as follows. Dear Mr. President, I shall be away from the island on leave during the period 10th to 28th June 2026. In accordance with the provisions of Section 33 of the Constitution, the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Douglas Gibson will perform the functions of the Office of President during my absence. As the Honourable the Senate will not be meeting prior to the start of my vacation leave, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you, therefore, please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honourable the Senate when next it meets? Signed by His Excellency the President, dated 8th June 2026.
Announcements by Your Honour, the President.
With announcements, I have communication from the Ombudsman. Reads as follows. Dear Mr. President, it is my pleasure to submit to you the reports of the activities of the Office of Ombudsman for the periods January 1st to December 31st, 2024, and January 1st to December 31st, 2025. The submission is made in keeping with Section 13(6) of the Ombudsman Act, Cap 8A of the Laws of Barbados, which states that a general report on the functions of the Ombudsman shall be prepared and submitted for laying before each House of Parliament. Signed by the Ombudsman, Reverend Dr. Nigel Taylor. Of course, the report is laid before the Parliament, and I advise members to read it carefully. But we have other announcements, indications of absence from Senator Walters and Senator Goodridge, both of whom are on parliamentary business, attending workshop, seminar, conference on public accounts committees, along with our Minister of Finance, organized by the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. Also absent will be Senator Slocum, who is overseas again, and indications of late arrival from Senator Redmond. Yes. Further announcements. Minutes of our meeting on Wednesday, June 5th, 2026. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, June 5th be deferred at this time.
The question is that the minutes of our meeting on Wednesday, June 5th, 2026 be deferred. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. Those minutes are accordingly deferred.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay today the following documents. The ILO Convention 152, Occupational Safety and Health Dock Work Convention 1979, number 152. Recommendation 160, Occupational Health and Safety Dock Work Recommendations 179, number 160. ILO Convention 159, Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment for Disabled Persons Convention 1983, number 159, and finally, Recommendation 168, Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment Disabled Persons Recommendation 1983, number 168.
Reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sin of the Senate moved by minister, introduction of bills.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the Supreme Court of Judicature Amendment Bill 2026.
The question. Sorry.
We also need a notice to be given first.
Mr. President, I also beg to move that notice be given at this time of the aforementioned bill.
The question is that the Supreme Court of Judicature Amendment Bill 2026 be read a first time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The bill is accordingly read a first time.
Public business.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 1. In the name of Senator the Most Honourable Mr. J. Walker, Senior Minister with responsibility for social and environmental policy, to move the second reading of the Barbados Medical Products Bill 2026.
Senator the Most Honourable Jerome Xavier Walcott.
President, no, everybody knows. Jerome X was good enough.
You are a saint. We know that you are a saint, named after a saint.
Named after 2 saints, actually. Mr. President, it seems to have been heckled even before I get started. Anyhow, Mr. President, I rise with a sense of satisfaction this morning to present this bill, which, if passed, will bring about the most significant transformation of the Barbados Drug Service since its inception in 1980. The creation of the Barbados Medical Products Authority will bring about a metamorphosis in Barbados' pharmaceutical regulatory system. But what will this agency do? What will the BMPA do? The BMPA will be a modern, autonomous national regulatory authority responsible for regulating medicines and other health devices, health products, ensuring that all products used in Barbados meet international standards for quality, safety, and efficacy. The authority will improve access to safe and effective medicines. It will, by doing this, obviously strengthen public health protection, but importantly, will support pharmaceutical manufacturing and research, and by extension, the life sciences sector in Barbados, as outlined in our various manifestos since 2018. This reform is also part of government's broad agenda to modernize the health regulatory system and indeed position Barbados as a regional leader in regulatory science. But, Mr. President, it has been a long journey. It started 4 years ago for us. Indeed, it started during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we in Barbados, like several other countries, small, developing, lower middle-income countries, were exposed to the vulnerability that they depended heavily on imported medicines. And in the throes of COVID, we were exposed to the fact that inequity in access to vaccines and pharmaceuticals, medical devices, in our case, even nasal swabs, were a problem. You had the funds, you wanted to borrow, you wanted to buy, you wanted to procure, but persons, you were not being assisted by the countries which produce and export. Indeed, at one stage, we ordered ventilators, paid for them, and then we had to be reimbursed because they were stopped from being exported. We've had issues in throughout the Caribbean. We had to borrow from each other, nasal swabs, containers to send testing, all sorts of things like this happened. During that period, if you will, in 22, coming out of COVID, we recognized as a government that a situation like this, we would have to mitigate against this happening again in the future. The trigger came, however, with the visit of President Paul Kagame, President of Rwanda, who came to Barbados in April 2022. And during the discussions with him and his officials, the whole issue of equitable access to vaccines and pharmaceuticals came up. And he explained to us how Rwanda had recently embarked on a process to mitigate the situation in future. And we're going ahead with plans to establish vaccine and pharmaceutical manufacturing in their country. He told us that they were looking at the manufacture of the messenger RNA vaccines, and they were going to establish a vaccine manufacturing facility with BioNTech, the famous German company at that time. This piqued our interest in Barbados. And later, of course, we had the privilege of attending the launch of their facility in Kigali. In June that year, they also put us in contact with the persons who would work with them in establishing their framework for drug manufacturing and the normal regulatory system that would be needed. And there's a constellation of events, Mr. President. On November, so that was in April, got us going. We visited in June, saw what the potential. In November 8, 2022, in the margins of the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, I don't know if the Honourable Senator was there, Prime Minister Motley, President Mohamed Irfan Ali of the Corporate Republic of Guyana, and President Paul Kagame met to discuss the matter of furthering pharmaceutical equity for global public health. Emanating from that meeting was an announcement of a transatlantic bridge between the Caribbean, Latin America, and Africa to develop and manufacture pharmaceuticals. Also present, and who have been very supportive, were the President of the European Commission, Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, the Director General of WHO, Dr. Tedros, the President of the European Investment Bank at that time, Dr. Werner Hoyer, and Professor Dr. Senait Thessia, a Vice President of the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation, and a very important name which I will come to in the course of this discussion because she has provided through the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation for a number of things as part of this development. Since that meeting and the announcements, Barbados has been responding by pursuing a strategic policy approach that included a number of things, a number of facets. We had the development of our own white book. I mentioned already that the Rwandans had put us in contact with the German consultants who developed a white book, and they did us, and with the assistance of the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation, we were able to embark on preparing and getting prepared our own white book, Mr. President. It is not for document at the House, but it is pharmaceutical equity for Barbados, establishment of sustainable pharmaceutical production in Barbados, a regulatory perspective. That was developed then. We worked then on the development of a bill, this draft bill, which, with the input in terms of what is required, if you're going to go to manufacturing, you have to reach certain levels. According to the benchmarking of WHO, you have to go to level 3 to qualify for manufacturing, and after that is level 4. Barbados is very rudimentary. We are BL level 1 at this point in time. So then we started work on the draft bill. And this was, I wouldn't like to say tedious, but it was indeed hard work. There were the stakeholder consultations, where there were the interactions with the consultants, and through it all, the EU played a role in assisting us in terms of training opportunities. PAHO, WHO did similarly, and the Rwandans were there with the director of the FDA come here several times, and indeed their lawyers who work in developing their own legislation to sort of guide us. We also at that time had the creation of the Barbados Pharmaceutical Inc., because we're preparing the regulatory framework, but if you want to get into manufacturing, whatever, you need that entity. The Barbados Pharmaceutical Inc. was created. I believe the chairman of that entity sits in this honorable chamber, and perhaps he will say a few words about that entity if he is persuaded to speak. We set about also building a South-South regulatory. It's not on that side. Not on that side. Sorry, Mr. President. Sorry. We set about to build a South-South framework. We recognize that the Global South needs to work together, especially in this area. And so we set about with a partnership and started with the creation of HEDPAC, which is a health development partnership between Africa and the Caribbean. Out of that, there have been a number of meetings, and that is fed into this process. And indeed, there was a culmination with a meeting last September of African and Caribbean health ministers in Addis Ababa to look at moving this process forward. I believe in other spheres you've heard of a delegation going to Ethiopia to look at recruiting health workers for Barbados. This is all coming out of this partnership where it is expected. I saw in the newspaper yesterday that Jamaica has just signed an agreement with Ghana for nurses and teachers. So this is what this was supposed to do. We set about also our focus that we would still align our national system according to global standards by utilizing the WHO benchmarking system. As I said earlier, the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation facilitated a lot of the preliminary work that we were doing. I should mention at this point the White Book was presented to government in November 2023, the framework document. And at that presentation, Prime Minister, Honourable Mia Motley, underscored the critical importance of establishing an independent regulatory authority grounded in scientific integrity. And she gave the clear commitment that this national regulatory authority, once established, would operate with the same level of institutional independence as the Central Bank and the Barbados Data Analytics Authority. And that has been the basis on which the design of the legislation and the governance rearrangement has been centered. Mr. President, as can be seen from the bill, the authority will regulate a comprehensive range of medical products and regulatory activities. On the medical products, these include medicines, vaccines, biologics, medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, and herbal medicines, which I believe I heard some members speaking about earlier. It will be looking at some of these. And of course, medicated cosmetics. In addition, the regulatory functions speak of marketing authorization of medical products. Currently, that is done in the Barbados Drug Service, but now it will be refined and done more astutely. Licensing of manufacturers, importers, and distributors, this happens at this point in time, but again, it will be refined and strengthened. Inspection, and this will come later on when we go into the manufacturing phase, to ensure that in all of these things you have good manufacturing processes. Pharmacovigilance and post-market surveillance will also come under the regulatory functions of the authority. And of course, the need to detection of substandard and falsified medicines. And in due course, which I know that Senator Conn will be interested in, we're looking at quality control, laboratory testing, and clinical trial oversight, which I know he has a fetish or love for. Mr. President, significant technical progress has been made in preparation for the authority's establishment. I mentioned earlier the WHO Global Benchmarking Tool, and with support from PAHO and WHO, a number of staff members have been assisted with several benchmarking exercises, and these assessments are guiding the development of regulatory systems alignment. In other words, the members of staff within the drug service who we know will transition to this entity are already being prepped to go so that they can hit the ground running when once it is established. PAHO has also organized several regional workshops on pharmacovigilance and networking on, again, substandard and falsified products to make persons more aware, because they are all over the world, and clearly they're coming into the region. The national objective, Mr. President, is to reach WHO maturity level 3 by 2028. That is very ambitious, but we will see how close we get to that. Meanwhile, in terms of the actual institution, the key preparatory work has been completed, and this includes the draft institutional development plan. We have the draft organizational structure and the staffing required, the draft job descriptions and the competency frameworks, the draft standard operating procedures, and the draft regulatory guidelines and technical frameworks. But I really have to mention at this stage the assistance that Barbados has received from a number of international entities and countries. PAHO WHO, as I said, has been working with the benchmarking tool and looking at, in addition to pharmacovigilance and surveillance systems, have also been working with us with quality management systems. The Rwanda Food and Drugs Authority have been there at every turn, every bend, and they've assisted us in regulatory system development of the legislation, staff exchanges. Persons from here, from the drug service, have gone to Kigali and have done attachments at that authority. And they have also shared regulatory templates and quality management standards with us. The European Union has a training program where Barbados and now Guyana, as I said, is part of this process with Lithuania, Poland, and Austria. And these have organized a number of workshops. There have been visits. I believe my comrade to my right has been part of one of these study visits to Europe. They have been working with us in terms of development of clinical trial oversight. And indeed, there's a resident consultant, I believe he's still in Barbados, who's been working along with us. And we are benefiting from the EU's Global Gateway facility, which has put, I don't remember the millions of euros into investing in this process, recognizing the importance for low and middle income countries to develop their own facilities for manufacturing, etc. United Kingdom has also been assisting, and they have also facilitated study visits and have been focusing on vigilance systems, and have also been interested in collaborating in research and development. There's been consultation, and I mentioned herbal medicines earlier, with the Ghana Center for Plant Medicine Research. And again, a number of workshops have been held between the people here at the Drug Service and the Ghanaians. The Indian and Central Drug Standard Control Organization has also been involved in India Pharmacopoeia as it relates to regulatory harmonization and pharmacopoeia collaboration. Regulatory harmonization will be very important to us in Barbados as we embark, because we will take a number of years before we reach there. And in the interim, these harmonization agreements are very important for us. And then there's Biopharma Excellence of Germany, which has been a strategic advisor on biologics development and regulatory pathways for advanced therapies. Mr. President, so these entities have played a very vital and supportive role for us as we embark on this journey. Now, Barbados has the authority is critical for providing an enabling environment for Barbados to push forward in terms of its pharmaceutical manufacturing. But there's current production, there has been current production in Barbados, fill and finish, production of tablets and capsules and oral solutions. And I believe this is through Collins Carlisle Lab, which has been in operation since 1888. And when we mentioned this to a number of entities, they're surprised that you've been indulging in manufacturing to some extent since 1888, but you're now only moving, hopefully, to the next stage. Needless to say, that is now called Aventa Barbados, no longer Collins. And the planned expansions in manufacturing, we're looking at sterile injectables and intravenous fluids, and you would have seen in the press in November that I visited a plant in Nigeria that is very interested in establishing a plant in Barbados. We're also looking at biologics in the processing in the medium term, not immediately. I mentioned earlier the need for this strategic South-South partnership. I mentioned the relationship with Rwanda's Food and Drug. I mentioned the relationship with the Center for Medicinal Plants Research in Ghana. But we've also established a connection with the Nigeria's National Agency for Food and Drug Administration Control. And they have been working with us, especially with the interest of a Nigerian company in coming to Barbados. And with these entities, the key areas of cooperation include regulatory reliance pathways, joint GMP inspections, and again, pharmacovigilance, collaboration on trials, etc. What are the next steps, Mr. President? We need first to have parliamentary passage of this bill to give us a legal basis for the establishment of the authority. We need to appoint the board, and we need the recruitment of the regulatory staff. In addition, on the technical side, we need the implementation of the quality management systems. We need the operational launch of the regulatory functions and the continued working with WHO in the benchmarking preparation. Mr. President, the bill has a number of sections and clauses, and I know that honourable members would have read it, all 72 pages of it, and it's scheduled. And so all I need to say is that it highlights a number of the issues. It speaks to the areas of activity in which the authority will be playing a role in terms of pharmacy licensing. It speaks of poisons. When you see poisons here, I think it might raise an eye. It has to do with medicines that are given conditions but can have given in large doses result in death. And they're crudely called poisons in these terms. I believe another raised a query from members who read it, the concept of orphan drugs. And these are drugs for very rare diseases which are being developed for specific purposes. They're called orphan drugs because they're not run-of-the-mill and they're not widely available. Those are some of the things that I think that people might raise issues about as it relates to the actual control of products and compounding on this. I think it is all clear-cut, and I think that all honourable members would recognize the importance of the bill. Mr. President, Barbados is on a strong trajectory towards establishing a modern, internationally aligned medicines regulatory authority. With the obvious political commitment, continued political commitment, and international collaboration, the authority is expected to become a regional leader in regulatory science, a trusted regulatory partner globally, and a key pillar supporting pharmaceutical innovation, health security, and the biosciences in Barbados. As I wrap up, Mr. President, believe it or not, I want to thank, I told you earlier I was going to call some names, Dr. Mariam Hines, Mr. Lindsay Bino, Dolores Masco, who's the Acting Director of Drug Service, they're not here. These three individuals have worked tirelessly on this project while doing their normal work. and I certainly have to commend them. But I want to commend especially Ms. Sean Bell for the role she's played. This is technical, highly technical, and she has, while she was acting as CPC, she worked assiduously with us in developing this legislation. She interacted with the consultants, both from in developing the White Book and also the consultants from Rwanda. She's been at all of the state. We had a number of stakeholder consultations, and she was at every one. She's with us through this process till the end. Unfortunately, she's no longer the CPC, but I think I need to commend her for the role she played in the development of this bill and making it possible. Mr. President, I am now obliged to you and beg that this bill be now read as second.
Thank you very much, the Most Honourable Senator Walcott. Senator Ali.
Morning, Mr. President. When I was last here, I had the occasion to speak to the concept of aspirational leadership and the idea that we, though small, need to dream big and need to recognize that we can achieve great things if we put the necessary effort into the matter. My friend, the Most Honorable Jerome X, well, I don't have your bravery, Mr. President, mentioned some of the past in the context of what informs the move that we are presently looking at. And COVID taught us a lesson, yes. We were blessed to have an honorable Prime Minister with a network of friends and allies that allowed us to access vaccines where countries of greater resources were struggling to receive. But that is being dependent on friends and allies. We are now in a position where there's war raging in the Middle East. Major supply routes, such as the Strait of Hormuz, have been blocked. Energy price volatility. Global supply chains are fragile at best. The changing geopolitical landscape also puts us in a place where we have to ask ourselves, do we have the friends that we once had? And even if we had the friends that we once had, can we rely on them in certain situations? Also cognizant that in this new geopolitical reality, aid normally comes with attendant strings, and it is almost a bargaining chip which calls into question your true independence at the end of the day when you are accepting that type of aid. So when this region relies on 97% importation of its medical needs, we are a vulnerable region, dependent on the graces and attitudes of our larger neighbors. So when I look at this legislation, I look at it in a manner where I recognize it creates the foundational base upon which we can build a pharmaceutical industry that is necessary in the context of our size, position, and where we are, necessary in terms of the present realities of world politics, and necessary for safeguarding the health of our people. Barbados is small. In the context of developing any viable industry, we can't rely on a market of 300 +1,000 persons. But there is a whole region to be served. And the Caribbean region is desperate for this type of industry. The idea and the concept behind what is planned relates to Barbados being a hub for the region, both in terms of manufacture and distribution of pharmaceutical products. The legislation sets the standards by which we can achieve that goal. My friend has spoken of the assistance and capability of Rwanda. And in time, it is our intention that we should have the same type of maturity level as judged by WHO as Rwanda, maturity level 3. But we have to crawl before we walk. And with the assistance of friends such as Rwanda and Nigeria, we can initially focus on fill finish and packaging in 5 main therapeutic areas. Those areas are critical to Barbados in the sense of our high level of NCDs. So with a focus on hypertension, diabetes, respiratory issues, antibiotics, and maternal and pediatric health, there is a core set of drugs which the Barbados Pharmaceuticals, Inc., which is the government arm and entity that has been identified to push the development of this industry. Those are core area where there's an intention to focus any initial efforts. BPI, which I have the pleasure of chairing, and I say pleasure because the excitement as to what this can mean for our country permeates the board. The possibilities, the recognition that if done correctly, this can transform our economy in a significant way, safeguard our people at the same time, allow us to serve our Caribbean neighbors. It puts us in a totally different hemisphere when it comes to the issue of medical equity. BPI has initiated 5 bankable catalytic projects. One such is a memorandum of understanding with AMA Medical Manufacturing, that's the entity out of Nigeria, with the aim of producing IV fluids. I think everyone in here understands the critical need for IV fluids in medicine, not only good doctors. And this is an area where we are 100% reliant on imports. More importantly, AMA has developed and is recognized for having a high-grade product, utilizing the latest storage technology in terms of how the IV fluid is safeguarded. In conjunction with PAHO, we have initiated a feasibility study to determine the likelihood and capability of the Newton project as a hub for distribution of pharmaceuticals throughout the region. So yes, PAHO is on board, and we have received substantial support from them, and they are helping to guide us in the setup, formulation of the industry, recognizing obviously, yes, we are new, we are relying on the persons who know Rwanda, Nigeria, PAHO, World Health Organization. There is a full group of support which hopefully ensures this is done right, it is done well from the beginning, and more importantly, that it is a sustainable industry going forward. So this bill grants the structure which allows that type of industry to grow. We cannot have that industry without this bill. The bill sets a structure by where we can start the assessment of what we have here. This is, for the layman, this is our FDA. This is the Food Drug Administration of America. This is what allows us to take care of our pharmaceutical world, assess the medicines that are coming into the country, and get into the manufacture of pharmaceuticals on a wide basis. And I say that because when you read all the pages, as my friend indicated, that we've all read, you may come away with the concept that it's a dry piece of legislation without recognizing what it actually provides in terms of Barbados's advancement. So yes, it has sections on control of pharmacies, it has sections relative to how we assess medicines and the like. But without this structure, those aspirational hopes and dreams cannot be met. When in 2022, the Honourable Prime Minister enunciated a vision of a South-South alliance as it related to the pharmaceutical sector, and spoke and presented to the President of Guyana, President of Rwanda, Director General of the World Health Organization, one could have heard those words and wondered if it was only a pipe dream. But this is where I get back to how I started my contribution by indicating aspirational leadership can seem like a pipe dream, but if the necessary effort, the necessary work, the necessary commitment is provided, it no longer has to be aspirational. And when we recognize that we are now at a point where this can't be a dream, but it has to be a necessity to take care of an urgent need within this region, we have to applaud the passage of this piece of legislation, because it's, as I said, it's the foundational block that allows us to develop the industry in the manner that we wish to develop the industry. And a lot of work has gone into getting us to this present point. Certainly, we've recognized the contributions not only of those international agencies, but the persons on the ground who have worked over the years. And the Senator would have highlighted some of those individuals. But I am blessed to be put in the opportunity to actually play a major part or some indicative part of growing this industry. And I am certainly, Mr. President, in total support of the legislation that stands before you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Ali. Senator Dr. Connell.
Mr. President, honorable senators, I rise to contribute to the bill, the Medical Products Bill 2026. I was going to say rise with some excitement, but since this has already been described as somewhat of a fetish for me, there really is no other bill that I would have preferred to delve deeply into than this bill that is before us. The bill is important for several reasons. Many of them have been mentioned before. But let me just paint the picture for you by stating that in public health, trust is important. And trust can only be achieved by the public if they are confident that regulatory standards are in place. Recently, I had a conversation with a former director of the United States Center for Disease Control, and he shared this text with me, Tom Frieden, The Formula for Better Health, How to Save Millions of Lives, Including Your Own. The book delves into trust and how public health, when trust fails, is lost. This bill has been a very long gestation. I have been part of that gestation, I think, at various stages, first, second, and third trimester. And as one would anticipate, there have been challenges. Some of these have been predictable, as with any pregnancy, and some of them have been unexpected as well. But let me just start by saying that I strongly support the bill and the legislation before us. I know it has been a difficult period in drafting, and I want to recognize those in the chamber who have contributed as well. So the bill has many strengths. First of all, it is a very comprehensive, all-inclusive bill. I read the 72 pages almost 72 times, looking for criticisms and various suggestions and comments, but it was probably so well constructed, these were difficult to find. But I found some. So the bill does kind of governs many existing committees that are already in place, such as in a former role on the Drug Formulary Committee, as well as the Barbados Drug Service, former chair, and other related committees. So it's good because I know at least one member of this chamber knows that as the former chair of the Drug Formulary Committee, I lamented on several occasions how drugs are regulated. Mr. President, it will amaze you to note that it is possible to go out there and purchase any medicinal product. It could be prescribed by the man on the street, it could be prescribed by the woman on the street, any product, and it's authenticated as a genuine medicinal product. Quite often in medical practice, 70% of the consultation is spent trying to convince patients that this is actually not a medical product or likely not to have therapeutic benefit. This is difficult, and it threatens safety and it threatens patient trust. It also makes the discussion about health extremely difficult. And so this regulatory bill, I hope, will address these areas. I hope that the same standard that prescribed drugs are held to, which in this country is a pretty high standard, that non-prescribed drugs, or so-called nutraceuticals, will also be held to that standard. In my own specialty, for instance, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, I recognized for the first time the importance of what I will call therapeutic autonomy, or maybe shall I say therapeutic sovereignty, where a country has control of its access to drugs, because this can change, as we can see. And there is inequity, and there is geopolitical struggle to get critical drugs. And whilst there were people on the front line dealing with a pandemic, many of us were in the background worried about the onslaught of the NCD surge and how that would impact the country in months and years moving forward due to a lack of access. We cannot continue on the status quo. We cannot continue importing drugs from country X and relying on international standards or the standard in the country that this drug was manufactured and taking it as our gold standard. Yes, institutions like the United States Food and Drug Administration are there, and there are also regulatory authorities in the United Kingdom. Many of the clinical studies and trials that have been done, and senior minister is aware of this, may never have been done on people who look like us, and therefore the extrapolation that can be had from these trials are really irrelevant. But yet we consume it not because we don't recognize that it might be irrelevant. We have no choice because we don't have a structure in place to do our own testing. So this bill does lay out a framework that allows for this. It is extremely ambitious. And so I would caution one of my first, what I hope is not a weakness. It seems extremely ambitious, and I hope that the staffing will be there. I'm not saying ambition is a bad word, I'm just saying it's extremely ambitious. Aspirational, thank you. And so I have confidence that the necessary staffing will be given to various areas to police it. And I know that Miriam Hines, who is the former director of the Barbados Drug Service, knows the many times we lamented on not the fact that we did not know that a particular institution might not have been producing drugs to a certain standard, but it was impossible to police it. I mean, you don't have the human resource capacity. The bill does speak to this, but I hope that the human capital is there to kind of enact it. And then it comes to the issue of research. How do you balance the authority with the autonomy of the researcher? Researchers, of course, like myself, would like to have an easier pathway to conduct clinical trials, but that would not be ethical. And so clinical trial application and approval needs to be, again, a very transparent process. Whenever I submit an application to the International Review Board, which is the current approval for these sorts of trials, I am prepared to face a major battle of approval. This is not a bad thing, because many of the clinical trials I'm involved in involve human subjects. And I expect that this level of rigor would be there. I hope, however, that the authority does not place such an additional burden that there is considerable delay and even frustration to researchers who want to conduct legitimate clinical trials, not just with drugs, but in terms of medical devices and even non-traditional use of traditional drugs. I note the comment made to orphan drugs, and this is also very important because in many respects, our health environment is totally unpredictable. Many of the diseases that we may see next year, we don't know we will see, and we will have to respond quickly. So these are also necessary, and fast approval is important. Probably one of the most exciting things for me personally about this bill is that the collaboration came as South-South, which is special to me as well. Because, again, not just in terms of national sovereignty and independence, but research is capable then in people who look like us and who respond like us, and maybe even have cultural similarities in the way we view prescribed medication and the way we view ethnopharmacology or non-traditional means. I hope also that the legislation, as it has been described, will seek, or the introduction of the legislation will come with it, continued education for healthcare professionals, because this would be a huge gap and a huge burden. I say this as a clinical pharmacologist, knowing that even in my own fraternity, there are challenges in prescribing standards. This has nothing to do with the quality of the drug, it's just a challenge in prescribing standards. And I know members of the Drug Formulary Committee, many times there are drugs that are approved, and sometimes the approval process may take a longer period because the application or the submission may not have the kind of scientific basis that the Drug Formulary Committee holds such applications to. And so it may be denied for that very reason. So prescribers need to be aware what they're prescribing and the safety of how they're prescribing. And I hope that even within the health profession, this authority will not be seen as a substandard type approval. In other words, this was only approved by the Barbados Regulatory Authority and not by an international body. I hope that the authority will be respected as the final authority on approval of these devices and drugs. In many cases, this delay and in reaching this point of birth is anticipated, and it's a good thing. It shows the rigor of research that went into it. I saw the intermediate stages. I lamented on the delay as well. I know Miriam Hines is quite aware of that. But I also appreciate why it occurred and why it was necessary for all the due diligence to have occurred. Consultation with the Drug Formulary Committee, I think, will still be important moving forward. And I think that many of the representatives on that committee, including the organizations represented such as BAMP and the Barbados Psychiatry Association, they will also need to have input into as we move forward and we develop the regulatory framework. So my recommendations as an overview, or as a summary really, is that I hope that the appointments are transparent, there's broader representation, and that there is some representation set aside for patient representatives on the authority. Patients should have a voice in the regulation of products within the country, because they are the people who will be using them. Clear timelines. I know once this legislation, well, hopefully it's passed today, but we should see timelines as to when it will be enacted and when these people will eventually be in positions, and when we will see amazing changes in what is allowed and not allowed to be prescribed or dispensed in around the country. There should, of course, be separation of roles. Since, for instance, someone like myself, if I was part of the authority, I would clearly have a bias. So conflicts of interest must be there, and they should be easily declared and checked, because this is a problem that many international organizations face, including the Food and Drug Organization. So, Mr. President, I want to commend the work done on this bill. I want to congratulate the administration for what I think has been a very substantial, innovative, and really a landmark kind of regulatory change in the way we manage medicinal products in this country, which some will say is long overdue, but everything comes in time. It's a bold and necessary step. It is important to engender public trust. In a time where misinformation, both medical and non-medical, is out there, trust is important and standards are important. The success really does depend, however, on implementation, capacity, and governance integrity. So I support the passage of this bill in principle with targeted strengthening moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Connell. Senator Honourable Lisa Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to speak on this bill this morning, really as a nod to my immediate predecessor and the senior minister who is responsible for social sector reform. Senator Walker introduced this bill this morning, and he outlined the extensive body of work that went into its preparation. In his introduction, he talked about the imperative that drove it in the first instance coming out of COVID. He spoke also about the partners that were involved in it, local partners, regional partners, international partners. He talks about the relationship building that facilitated it. And then he talks about the local team, two of whom are here with us today, Dr. Mariam Hines and Lindsay Bino, who have helped to anchor it through the process, and the immediate past Chief Parliamentary Counsel who helped with the framing of it. I want to acknowledge the contribution that he has made in reframing the discussion on pharmaceutical products in this country, not just, and medical products in this country, not just with this bill that is before us here today by way of the Medical Products Regulatory Authority. He mentioned the Barbados Pharmaceutical Inc. That also was started under his leadership and his tenure as Minister of Health. What he didn't mention at the time was the creation of the Barbados Living Laboratory, which is also a creation that was introduced under his leadership and under his tenure. Many of us saw just a few weeks ago Prime Minister Motley and my own ministry and McMaster University out of Canada offering condolences on the passing of Dr. Juliette Daniel. We saw that in every media house locally, and we saw it out of the Canadian media as well. She was an exemplary Barbadian who had prioritized cancer research and cancer gene and named it Calypso after as a nod to her own heritage. She sat on the Advisory Council for the Barbados Living Lab, along with other luminaries from around the globe that reflect what Senator Walcott spoke about in terms of international, regional, and national partnerships that lead to excellence. And through those three institutions, the Barbados Pharmaceutical Inc., brand new, the Barbados Living Laboratory, brand new, and now we have the passage of the Regulatory Authority, equally meant to be brand new. These are innovations that have been led by Senator Walcott, and I want to acknowledge his contribution to the innovation in the health sector. It would have been remiss of me to sit in my seat and not publicly acknowledge the work that he has done, because government very much is a continuum. And so while I may sit in the chair now, this is work that he has started, this is work that he conceived of, and he has a long history as not just a Minister of Health, but as a medical practitioner himself, and a second-time Minister of Health. And so these are things which are almost instinctive to him, and he has brought a level of leadership to this particular matter. So what then becomes the imperative going forward? What is the vision that has been laid, and then what comes next? So individually, these are absolutely not separate initiatives. They are very much the architecture of something transformational. And when paired together with these individual elements and the work being done in industry and manufacturing for the creation of a life sciences sector, which is falling under the Ministry with responsibility for innovation, science, and technology now, that then becomes a part of the whole. And I want to be able to acknowledge that as well. And so as Minister of Health, having inherited this strong platform on which we can build, I want to make it clear that the institutions that we have built are there, and the next chapter is exactly how we can integrate, having implemented Senator Connell. Mr. President, we have been clear from the comments made by Senator Walcott and Senator Ali, who, I'm not sure if he mentioned it, but he happens to sit as the chairman of the Barbados Pharmaceutical Inc. And the team from BPI is, as we speak now, preparing to leave tomorrow to go off to engage with the partners in Nigeria that Senator Walcott spoke about, and we have a team there. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, and the reason for that really is because just a few weeks ago, while in Geneva at the World Health Assembly, we had the opportunity to meet with the partners from Nigeria and to prepare for this upcoming mission. And so we're making sure that as we set up the collaboration between the South-South partnerships that have been referenced so far, that we're able to integrate the work that has already started under Senator Walcott's leadership. We talked about COVID and the fact that the world changed during COVID, and we lived that. The supply chains collapsed then in the same way that they are collapsing now with the Strait of Hormuz closing. And we saw just a few weeks ago in the newspapers that countries in the north, in Europe in particular, were facing shortages that would have seen them in 2 weeks running out of medical products. If that were to happen again, Mr. President, the experience of COVID has taught us that we as Barbados cannot depend on anyone to come and save us, but our relationships and our networks will matter. When this legislation was first being developed, it started with just medicines. It was found that it could not just be medicines. Through consultations, you now have the expanded scope of the legislation, which speaks about medical products. So it's medicines plus, plus, plus. That is a nod to health security, Mr. President. And we want to ensure that medical products generally do not depend in this country on the goodwill or the capacity of others. Health security for us is equally national security, and national security requires capability. That's why the Barbados Pharmaceutical Inc. is about manufacturing, why the Regulatory Products Authority is about regulatory development, why the Living Lab is about research and innovation and bringing together partners like the University of the West Indies. But let me raise my hand before Senator Connell applauds and say that we want to ensure that there are frameworks in place that allow for ownership of research outputs when introduced into the country. I am a UE person, a UE graduate, and a UE former employee. And I know I've always been very clear that the framing of intellectual property protections around innovations and research coming out of the University of the West Indies is not commercially viable. And we're not going to encourage innovations coming out of our university if there is not a relook at what that framing is. And I say that openly because I've said it internally as well as a former staff member. So we have to ensure that we create an enabling environment to ensure that Barbados can then produce essential products and contribute meaningfully to regional security. But I want to bring our attention to a couple of proposals at this point. We currently have a couple of countries in our region, doing some really interesting things. A few weeks ago at COSOD, the Council on Health and Social Development for CARICOM, we had meetings with all of the regional ministers of health. And there we heard from countries like Guyana doing really incredible research in genetic testing and being able to use that to help guide their innovations. We are doing that work here too, yes, and the work of the Living Lab is going to build on that. But we are all small countries, and when we talk about South-South collaboration, it means that South-South collaboration must also begin at home, and we build economies of scale while working with our colleagues right here in the region. I want also to acknowledge the work being done by PAHO in building a logistics hub for medicines here in the region, and that also has helped to collaborate, to facilitate South-South collaboration. The Barbados Living Lab, in particular, is very much one of our greatest opportunities in this space. Innovation typically has happened elsewhere. It has come onto our shores from other countries, or we have innovators coming, collaborating with our tertiary level institutions, grabbing the research is published, and then somewhere in that mix, we've lost the intellectual property rights to own our knowledge. So we have to create that environment that allows our innovators to test solutions in real-world environments, allows researchers to generate evidence, and regulators to be able to regulate outputs. I want, as I close, because this is really a very brief presentation at this point in terms of the way forward. The Barbados Drug Service is there. We've strengthened the Barbados Drug Service already historically, but there's some more work to be done in the Barbados Drug Service. On a monthly basis, I now have the benefit, as did, I would imagine, Senior Minister Walcott did when he sat in the chair, of receiving reports on the stocks of the Barbados Drug Service, where various drugs are, and how we're going to be able to cater to persons in need with those drugs. And I want to take the opportunity here to say that sometimes people reach out to me and they ask me, I need to be able to get this particular drug, but it's not available. And I want to make it clear that sometimes not all drugs are on the Barbados drug formulary. Not all drugs are there. There are those drugs that are available under the Barbados drug formulary, but then there are those that are not. And the interesting and important thing about that is that when we look at the region as a whole, Barbados has the most expansive listing in our drug formulary in the region. The most expansive. And so while there are always going to be those things that may be outliers that are not on the formulary, we are able to look after our people there. What are we doing now with the Barbados Drug Service? Digitalization is underway, rolling that out, integrating how the Barbados Drug Service, specifically at our polyclinics, can interface with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and drugs coming from there, in particular certain categories of drugs that are typically only dispensed in the hospital. How do we then work together with the Barbados Drug Service to make sure that these drugs are available to Barbadians where they are already on the formulary? So we're ensuring that the future drug service must be more digital, it must be more responsive, it must be heavily data-driven, it must be patient-centered, and it must ultimately be more resilient, because as we talk about regulatory management and pharmaceutical production, we also have to ensure that the drugs that we do not produce, the drugs that we do import, are on island in sufficient enough quantities that when supply chains get interrupted, that we have a stockpile on island to be able to service our people. And so, Mr. President, I just have 3 things that I want to close with. We need to be able to have a few things in place. One, as we establish this Medical Products Regulatory Authority as a center of regional excellence here in Barbados, equally, it must be a center of regional excellence all across the developing world. In collaboration with the partners that we have already started working with, Rwanda, Nigeria, and others in the African Medical Products Authority, we need to work collaboratively with them. We equally will have the expansion of product production with the BPI, and we'll have that being rolled out in the course of the next couple of weeks. But ultimately, we must position Barbados as the region's preferred destination because all of the frameworks are in place, the regulatory environment is in place for health innovation, clinical research, and life sciences investment. So that in the same way that back in the day, we used to have, what was it, Intel at the time where people were coming in and were producing microchips, here in Barbados must be that space where inward flows of foreign direct investment must come to pair together with local investment, local knowledge, local ideas, local innovation to be able to create a modern innovation space for Barbados. Finally, we must be able to create a life sciences ecosystem that generates jobs, the investments that I spoke about, exports, and economic growth. I want to see young Barbadians studying not just medicine to be clinicians, but chemistry to see opportunity, to be able to become researchers and innovators as well. Not everyone needs to see a patient. Sometimes we need to be able to have persons who are in our laboratories, living behind their microscopes, creating new products that clinicians are able to use in their investigations of patients. I want to see young Barbadians, Senator Connell, through you, Mr. President, studying pharmacology so that they can see opportunity. But I want them to be the pharmacologists who also produce and not those that only prescribe or regulate. I want to see young Barbadians studying engineering, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and data science. I want them to see this as an opportunity because the future of healthcare is no longer confined to doctors' offices, hospitals, or clinics. It is also in our life sciences center. And the future of healthcare is also for this country under this administration an economic sector, a research sector, an innovation sector, a technology sector, but it is also very much for health security purposes a social sector. And for these reasons, Mr. President, I commend this bill and I support this bill to this honourable chamber.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. Senator Malado.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everyone. A special good morning to the Honourable, afternoon, thank you, the Honourable Senator X, sorry, Senator Walker, sorry. Sorry. Mr. President, I'm going to be very brief. You know, when I look at these things, I always have a bit of a business view to it. And I'd like to look at perhaps this bill from that point of view, and I would like to commend all those who have worked on it. I think that we often speak in here and in other places about the need to diversify our economy. And this bill really could actually be spoken to in a strong way as providing an opportunity for significant diversification of the economy. So as I say, I like to look at these things from the hat that I generally wear, which is a businessman's perspective. But it also adds resilience, because that has also been spoken about, and to think that we are not producing our own IV fluids here when it is actually something that we could do, I think that is excellent as well. I'm also being led to believe, sir, or being told, Mr. President, that Barbados, with our very small population, we have a unique opportunity with the DNA pool that we have here. That there's a significant amount of research that can be done and trials here because we have this very unique DNA pool. And I think that this perhaps will give some opportunities for persons like Dr. Connell in that area to do some research within this small area. So all of these things are good, and that's why I again say I support the bill. I would say the two other things that are about the strengths of this bill, which I think particularly good, is number one, the reliance on regulatory bodies from overseas. Because the thought that we might be able to regulate big pharma, and I'm glad that this bill recognizes that Barbados is too small to duplicate the full scientific review capacity of countries like Canada, the US, the African continent, etc. The second strength I would like to highlight in the bill is the recognition of the parallel importation of drugs, generic drugs that can be substituted. That is good for the consumer. I believe it's good for the industry. So I would, though, also just spend my time on a couple of areas which are not going to be unique in the presentation that I've given in here before, Mr. President, which is a couple of the weaknesses that I see. And I see it as a consistent weakness when we are putting forward regulations. I am a bit concerned that this authority may become too large for Barbados. In, I think it is the third schedule in the consequential amendments, there's a list of 34 positions, including CEO, deputy CEO. I learned today that the chairman is amongst us, assistant directors, directors, pharmacovigilance, surveillance, licensing, inspections. There is a lot in there that we are building in that third schedule. Really? Okay. I apologize if I have misled anyone with that, but that was my reading of it. Not intentionally. The other thing with the bill, sir, is that the fees are too open-ended. The bill, my reading of it, it says that the authority may determine the fees for the services and the board may have regulations for charging fees. That is normal. I understand that. But from a business perspective, I would have liked to have seen some transparency and proportionality in that. Small importers, pharmacies, medical device distributors should not face the same burden as multinational manufacturers. So those fees in there, I would ask simply for transparency. The last thing that I would say before I take my seat again, sir, is that in general, you know what my comments are when it comes to regulation. I like as little regulation as possible, but this particular bill is one that needs regulation, and it does, and I support it fully, because this industry is one that affects us in a significant way, and it needs to be regulated. But having said that, why do we not have standards in here that will speak to what is the time frame for some of these regulatory licenses and things that are needed in the bill? I have said this before, and I've been corrected by the other side to say, oh, these have no places in the bill and they will come later. Well, in every occasion I've been told that I still have not seen them come later, as to see what the actual standards are that we're going to use. So I do hope that we will see what those are later, because this is a good bill, and it could be a bit better had we put in there these type of standards that we want to be world-class. And part of being world-class and to play in this is to be responsive. So, with those few words, Mr. President, as I say, I support this bill in its entirety. I think that at the end of the day, I think that there's a side to this that the good senator who led this perhaps didn't mention, but I've mentioned on his behalf, is the diversification that this can do for the Barbados economy. If we can attract pharmaceutical companies here, and it can give us more resilience where we can produce these things ourselves. And I may have mentioned them in passing, and if you did, I add to what you had to say. And therefore, with those few words, I support this bill. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Malinou. Senator Honourable.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, actually. Mr. President, I rise today in full support of this Barbados Medical Products Bill 2026. Mr. President, it's not the kind of bill that would immediately gain public attention because it doesn't deal with roads, housing, taxes, or crime, and we don't usually see it, sexy like the other bill that was discussed last week in the Senate. But the truth is, Mr. President, that every single Barbadian will be affected by this legislation at some point in their lives, because every one of us will need medicine. Every one of us have a parent, a grandparent, a child, a spouse, a friend, or even a neighbor who depends on medication to stay healthy and, in some cases, to stay alive. And when we walk into a pharmacy, Mr. President, and collect a prescription, we do so with a simple expectation that the medicine is safe and it has been tested and assessed, and that someone has properly checked it before it reaches our hands. And that is what this bill is about, Mr. President. Mr. President, the world has changed dramatically. Years ago, most of us would just go to the local pharmacy, maybe the polyclinic in their area, and get their medication, and never really give much thought to where it came from. But today, medicines travel through complex global supply chains. We go online and order our medications. Some of us may go on Amazon or other websites. We order medical devices online on different websites and stuff like that. And new treatments are being developed faster than ever before. But at the same time, Mr. President, we are seeing increasing reports about counterfeit medicines. We are seeing reports about fake supplements and products that do not contain what they claim to contain. So imagine, Mr. President, a Barbadian that did not go through the right channels and receiving insulin that has not properly been stored. Imagine a parent at her last ends, her last nerve now, purchasing medication for a sick child, as she thinks it's her last resort, only to find out that the medication was counterfeit. Or imagine an elderly person taking blood pressure medication that does not meet required quality standards. The consequences, Mr. President, can literally be life and death. And this bill gives us the tools to prevent those situations from happening before they even happen. It creates the modern regulatory authority that can inspect, test, monitor, and investigate, and even, where necessary, remove unsafe products from the market. But what really stood out to me, Mr. President, when going through this bill is that it's not just reacting to today's problems, but it's preparing us for tomorrow's challenges. Almost all the speakers before me spoke about COVID-19. And I know we all remember the uncertainties during COVID-19. Every day we go on social media, there are so many questions. When will the vaccines arrive? Are they safe? How quickly can they be approved? And how do we respond to this emergency? And of course, all these social media authorities, these social media scientists and stuff like that had their own answers. But it was only because of our Prime Minister's strength and determination and her partnerships that we were able to get through that by getting what we needed at the time. But this COVID-19 pandemic taught us that public health emergencies do not wait for bureaucracy. And this bill creates mechanisms that allows us to react quickly while still maintaining the proper scientific oversight. And this is a lesson that we learned the hard way that we are building on for the future. And I'm pleased to see it reflected in this legislation. Another strength that is reflected in this bill is that it recognizes something very important to us. And the speaker before me alluded to it. We are a very small country. We cannot do everything alone. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying that, Mr. President. The United States have the FDA with thousands of staff. The European Union has massive regulatory agencies with many scientific resources. But so it would not make sense for Barbados to spend millions of dollars trying to duplicate what has already been done by some of the reputable regulators across the world. But instead, Mr. President, this bill allows Barbados to build trusted partners and build relationships with these partners so that we can rely on their findings while still maintaining our own oversight. And that is not weakness, Mr. President. That is smart governance. And it means that Barbadians can gain access to safe medicine quickly today without compromising our standards. Mr. President, I'm also particularly pleased that the bill recognizes the importance of regional collaboration. Because the Caribbean faces some of the same challenges, whether we are talking about medicine shortages, counterfeit products, supply chain disruptions, or even the future pandemics. None of these challenges, Mr. President, stop at the doors of one country. Because a shipment that enters one Caribbean territory today can find its way into another Caribbean territory tomorrow. And that's why I believe that Barbados shall continue to strengthen our partnerships with Cartha, Paho, and all of our regional neighbors. Because the future of medicine regulation cannot be built country by country, but must be built together. And Mr. President, as I said, I strongly support this bill in its entirety, but I would like to offer one recommendation when we are building out the regulations. And that is that we pay some consideration to accessibility. Not just accessibility of how we access, the medication and stuff like that, but access to the information contained as relates to this medication. Because, Mr. President, yes, we have visually impaired people in our country, but I'm not only speaking about visually impaired people. We have persons with learning disabilities, intellectual challenges, and we cannot forget the fact that we are a very aged society and we're continuing to age, Mr. President. And we know that with age comes its own challenges. So, Mr. President, I'm asking that we pay some consideration to accessibility as it relates to labeling, as it relates to information content, as it relates to the expiry dates as well, and even the side effects in medication. So I'm asking that we look to possibly have, yes, Braille labels when possible, but also large print. And we work towards having accessible digital tech as well to help persons independently manage their health in this country. Because, Mr. President, this is a matter of patient safety. And we can only imagine how devastating it could be if you have a lot of medications to take and you cannot correctly make out which is which medication, or even remember or can ascertain the dosage to take. We know how devastating that can be, but it can also be a matter of privacy. As individuals, as adults, we want our own privacy. And imagine now, you don't want your children, as an elderly person, for instance, knowing what you're taking, what challenges you're having. You don't want to worry them. But now you have to rely on them to read all this information to you. And it goes even further than that, Mr. President. When someone gives us a bottle of medication, we want to be able to verify it for ourselves to make sure it is correct. Accessibility is nothing new or strange to this government. Just a few years ago, this government introduced accessible money notes. And now because of that, I can confidently, go to my hairdresser, my nail lady, or even the supermarket. I take out my $50, my $100, and I know what I'm looking at because of the symbols on it. And I don't have to rely on someone to tell me, oh, that's a $20, when I know in fact it's a $50. So I'm asking that we pay similar consideration when we're making out the regulations, because medication, I might add, is even more important and can be a matter of life and death. Mr. President, Senator Honourable referred to the fact that this bill is about trust. And I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. Because when a mother gives medication to her child, she trusts that the medication is safe. And when a person injects himself with insulin, they trust that the medication has been properly assessed and has been stored properly. When a cancer patient accesses their treatment, Mr. President, they trust that that treatment has been properly assessed and has been monitored. And I'm asking now as well that we pay attention that when persons receive information, they can trust that they have the correct information and have access to that information. Mr. President, this bill is about protecting Barbadians' safety, confidence, trust, and protecting the health of all Barbadian people. And for that, Mr. President, it has my full support, and I commend it to this chamber, and I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Odell. Her Honor, the Most Honourable Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Before I get into the gravamen of my remarks, I just want to do two things, and that is, one, to thank Senator Odell, I think, for reminding us that those who have challenges need to be included in the development of national policy and initiatives. And when you are able-bodied, there are so many things that you take for granted and just ignore, and you do not even recognize the extent to which others are prejudiced. As an older person, sir, with arthritis in my right knee, I am now very sensitive to the fact that a lot of modern furniture is extremely low, and it becomes very difficult to, you know, when you're putting pressure on your knee to get out of it. I was in a Calypso tent recently, sir, and I had to ask a young man to pull me up. Luckily, I chose a strong one with good muscles. And but though I bring some degree of levity, sir, I think you do appreciate that really there is significant prejudice in a lot of what we do without considering how it impacts those of us who are not physically able in one way or another. So that was one note that I wanted to make. And the second note which I wanted to make was to speak to something raised by Senator Malalu, and that was the absence of transparency and certainty by not specifying the fees. I would want to remind that these fees are not a penalty. When one develops criminal legislation, one will specify penalties in the legislation which are finite. But when one is developing legislation of this nature, one doesn't specify the fees because it is legislation. And therefore, every time you want to amend the fees, you would have to come back to Parliament to seek an amendment. So you put it in the regulations rather than in the body of the legislation itself to prevent that kind of constant bringing of minor matters before the chamber. So the absence of specific numbers relative to fees has nothing to do with uncertainty or lack of transparency, but accuracy and timeliness of process. So just to put that on the record. And sir, I therefore, with those remarks out of the way, seek now to make my own observations on this legislation, which I strongly support. I start by thanking the minister and all those who have had some role in bringing this legislation before the chamber today. I go on to make, sir, a very political point, and that is that I recall the resistance to the Barbados Drug Service when the Barbados Labour Party set it up. That it did not enjoy the support of a large percentage of the medical profession, that all sorts of allegations about wrongdoing and so on were made, but that the government persisted. And today we can see the kind of tool that it has become for national development, not just for the dispensing of medications, but for taking us further into the development sphere in relation to pharmaceuticals. And therefore, I congratulate all who are involved and say that this legislation really moves us from dream to vision to implementation for the national good. And that is to be applauded. It will establish Barbados's leadership in yet another sphere of regional, national, and global enterprise. It will guarantee that Barbadians, or demonstrate that Barbadian trained talent has significant capacity for working in several different disciplines in areas that are beneficial at the regional and global levels. Yesterday, sir, we saw with the launch of Pearly, a large, the new app, because this is the first time I believe it's being talked about in Parliament, named after the iconic character from Bajan Bus Stop, a new app which will allow Barbadians to engage more interactively with government processes, government services, government agencies, and departments. But the point that I was making, sir, is that the number of young people, baby-faced young people, some of whom, as we would say in Barbados, ain't even lost the mother features yet, who were the engineers and the brains and talent behind this innovation. And it blessed your heart to see what was coming out of the University of the West Indies, and indeed what Barbadian young people are capable of, because that is really cutting edge and is equated with what is being produced at the international level. And this new initiative, that this legislation, because this is enabling legislation, which is preparatory and proactive rather than reactive. Once you start an industry, it's proactive. And it will allow for the opening up of new job opportunities in Barbados for young people who are trained in various disciplines of science, who would previously have previously had to go into teaching or something other than their particular very specialized discipline, or go overseas to be able to work in that sphere. But now these opportunities are going to be available to them right here in Barbados, and many of them will take the opportunity to stay at home and become the pioneers in this new industry. So when we speak to the benefits of this legislation, one of them is the opportunity for young people and the creation of jobs in the economy, because the creation of jobs won't just be for scientists, it will be for managers, it will be for administrators, it will be for people working in support areas, in labs and scientific areas, and indeed probably the drug service itself will have to increase the hires. It enhances access to drugs. I am not going to elaborate on it because the point was made well, I think, about how during COVID our access to necessary drugs for our people were closed off because the large countries had the power to demand quantity in the marketplace and to be able to get the drugs, which we had difficulty accessing because our small numbers did not allow us the same leverage in the markets. So it increases opportunities for access to drugs. It will increase foreign exchange earnings through the issue of exports, and it will reduce import costs of drugs and pharmaceuticals and medical devices. I was intrigued, sir, as I heard the minister speak, and I want to thank my office and to thank the former head of the drug service for giving me some quick information, because I started to wonder what kind of expenditure we make on drugs per annum. We know that food and fuel are $6 and $9 billion in that order. Sir, my information tells me that We spent in 2024 $42.66 million in drugs imports in Barbados. And in 2025, the sum was 54.91 million US dollars. We reimbursed in 2010, I don't have more recent figures than that, to the private drug services in Barbados, the private pharmacies, 50 million, I think, 55 million Barbados dollars. I don't know, but in the 6 years, you would imagine that that price has increased significantly. If we can manufacture pharmaceuticals and medical devices to save that kind of foreign exchange annually, that money can then go into other things. If we can have that kind of export capacity, then our foreign exchange earnings will increase substantially. For me, sir, I see here not just opportunity, access, foreign exchange earnings, revenue generation as important, but as somebody who works in the diplomatic or the international sphere, the increased level of South-South cooperation has to be commended. In particular, sir, I saw a new triangular trade from Africa to the Caribbean to Latin America and to the rest of the world. It is interesting, therefore, how this becomes a mechanism of post-colonial sovereignty and drug sovereignty for our nation. And this is important because people can and do hold us to ransom relative to prices and relative to access. I want to support what I'm saying, sir, by citing two recent examples. One would be the fact that during COVID, a country which is widely regarded as a friend of ours employed ancient legislation relative to war to stop drugs being exported, COVID drugs and COVID medical devices being exported to developing countries such as our own. That's the first example, because people may have thought that I was giving extreme rhetoric when I spoke about post-colonial sovereignty and how this stops us from being held ransom. The second example that I would want to cite, sir, is that we know the extent to which malaria is endemic in Africa. And yet, malaria drugs were increased by 5,000%. In particular, a drug called Daraprim, which is essential for people in Africa to be treated by this, to be treated for malaria using this particular drug. If we have the capacity, and the doctor in the chamber, or one of the doctors in the chamber, but the doctor of pharmacology in the chamber, made the point about testing in populations that are black populations, populations that have our particular genetic construct, populations that behave differently and react differently to drugs and pharmaceuticals than other non-black populations, then we will be adding significantly to the development of scientific information, and therefore the opportunities for research and development, which this new initiative brings into the marketplace and into the country, is of extreme significance. It is important too, NCDs were mentioned. If we could start to manufacture drugs which are used to treat diseases which are of peculiar prevalence in our own populations, then that helps us significantly to ensure the well-being of Barbadians and of people who look like us. So this trade, this manufacturing capability that we are providing the legislative leverage for is of extreme significance, to black populations, and as I said, the issue of post-colonial sovereignty. It will further diversify the Barbadian economy. There has been criticism of our reliance on, on tourism, for foreign exchange, for revenue generation, for jobs, and for the cascading effect into the wider economy. But this allows us an area of economic diversification in a field that will always be in demand, because the demand for tourism product or for hotel rooms can be closed down when there is a hurricane, can be shut down when there is any ban on international movement. If a disease were to become endemic in Barbados, for some reason it would stop people from wanting to be here. But there will always be a demand for pharmaceuticals and medical devices. There is nothing in the world, except God comes and makes everybody healthy. There is nothing in the world that will stop a demand for drugs and pharmaceuticals, so that the entry into this area of enterprise is extremely significant for Barbados. Not only potentially the diversification of the economy, but broader than that, the diversification of the economy into an area for which there will be continuous demand. And this is not what the economists like to refer to. Medical products and devices are not what the economists like to refer to as Griffin goods. So that is something that we have to applaud, because the legislation does provide the basis for this area of development and for further development of Barbados. You know, it is interesting as time periods change. There was a point when the manufacture of garments and of things like smocking or maybe furniture, certain elements of furniture were of extreme importance. But now, as we develop, as we broaden our view of what our development is, as we seek to reindustrialize and to develop new areas of industry for ourselves in the global marketplace, this is part of a leading edge thrust that government is taking, and for which we need to be, and of which we need to be supportive. There have been comments, again, from the Honourable Senator Cummings about the intellectual property benefits. These cannot be ignored, because this too is a source of revenue generation, which will establish us further in the marketplace. In our culture and in our countries, we tend to develop things, whether it is the inputs that were used from Jamaican territorial waters for the manufacture of COVID drugs, whether it was the development of the steel pan. We do not protect our intellectual property, nor do we protect the resources within our territorial space. And there are others who come and take them and benefit from them in ways that we do not. And then we become price takers and product takers of what really should have belonged to us. So as a corollary of this legislation, the correct steps have to be taken to ensure that there are the appropriate intellectual property benefits when these goods are manufactured. I think that we will see coming out of this a new cadre or a new cohort of black scientists. We learned through a series of movies of the role that black scientists had played in the development of NASA and other major initiatives for which they never got any credit and for which they really did not get the kinds of benefits and kudos that others who did not look like them received. But this clearly will be driven by black scientists from the diaspora, the African diaspora, and in that regard, I think we have something of which we can be proud. There have been points made today, and I think legitimately, about ensuring, about quality assurance and the risks of drugs, fake drugs on the marketplace. I think the legislation, this demonstrates another necessity and for and value of the legislation. There are now a lot of boutique drugs that are being formulated, manufactured, and distributed internationally. Some are exclusive, are the exclusive province of the elite and the very wealthy. And it is of concern, therefore, and the existence of legislation and the fact that we can monitor, review, and take cognizance of what is being manufactured in Barbados ensures that we remain a clean jurisdiction in terms of the manufacture of dangerous drugs and of opioids and other things which can do harm. So this legislation has that further benefit. As a result, the Barbados brand of pharmaceuticals will be established as of high quality and clean, clean in the context of not associated with nefarious activities in the marketplace, and that can only inure to our benefit and to the enhancement of our national reputation. I would like to see that this manufacture, once it starts, also drives down the cost of pharmaceuticals in the marketplace. I was speaking to an older friend of mine who lives in the United States, who said to me that there's a certain drug that he takes. He buys it in quarterly, in 3-month blocks, and that the medicine went in the space of a year from something like 176 US dollars to 300 and something US dollars. So that's a 6 month. And the last time he bought, which then would have signaled the 9-month purchase, went to 860 something dollars. So the marketplace is kind of now in free fall. It is hard to say from my perspective, because this is not an area that I track closely, the extent to which it is price gouging or the extent to which inputs are becoming harder to access because of current geopolitical conflicts and difficulties in manufacturing spaces and so on. But whatever the reason, the consequence will come to our shores in the price of increased prices, in the form of increased prices, and that will compound other price increases that we are already receiving in the Barbados market. And we have to be conscious, therefore, of what is happening globally and the multiple tentacles and impacts which these geopolitical activities that we hear on the news may or may not pay attention to, but we have to understand what the consequences, the full gamut of consequences are for us. So I'm hoping that these interventions, this legislation, will help to bring about interventions in the marketplace which can lower prices for the Barbadian population. In speaking about the drug service, sir, I would wish, and kudos were given earlier to the most honorable Senator Jerome X. But I would wish, sir, before I close, when I talked about the drug service and its potential and the way we are now seeing it go into new areas of enterprise that we had not previously contemplated, and roles that we did not see it taking on. I want to salute them for the courage and the entrepreneurial type spirit to take up this challenge and to push Barbados forward into this new sphere, because it is, for me, sir, even though I'm not a scientist, it is extremely exciting to see Barbados making these kinds of strides in my lifetime, for all of the reasons that I gave earlier. But I would wish, sir, not to close when I talk about the drug service without saluting the work of a former health minister, Dame Billy Miller, who would have been the minister who established the drug service, as I said, amid tremendous opposition in Barbados. And like so much other BLP policy, whether it's the construction of the harbor, the building of the ABC highway, the Tenantries Freehold and Purchase Act, while it was done against, sir, the financial services sector, the offshore sector, all were done by facing fiery opposition. But today we live to see the benefits for Barbados, for our economy, for our society, and for our individual citizens. And sir, this is why I continue to support this party, because of the way in which it has transformed the nation and transformed lives. And I believe that this legislation today has the potential to do that, and I'm utterly delighted to be here, to have had the opportunity to give it my complete support. I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Thompson. Senator Nells.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Chamber. As I rise to speak on this wonderful work, I must say, I remember early this morning, an honorable senator said to me, I look forward to hearing how mischievous you're going to be today. I promise her that I will not be mischievous. But the reality for me is that I need to see the numbers. I need to see the numbers. The bill is absolutely fantastic. I can't fault it. I just can't fault it. But I really would love to see a P&L, a balance sheet, and a cash flow statement as it relates to this entire transformation of the medical pharmaceutical component of this country. And I say this fundamentally because, like everything else, this is going to require a significant amount of capital input by the government. But we, as a people, understand the issues that we currently have with the drug service. It runs out of money. You go to, I happen to have to go to to my pharmacy, and constantly you will hear, we don't have this on the formulary, but then we have this, and that. But if you want this, buy this. If you want consistency in your medication, you have to then go and buy this particular brand of drug. Otherwise, it's a bit dicey as we move along from point A to point B. So I really would love to see what it really would cost the country in terms of the capital input that it has to put into this project. It may not be beyond us, but it is a point of conversation as it relates to how we will move that forward, what we will charge for licenses, not licenses in terms of a pharmacy paying $10 here, but when we get into the world of big pharma, those guys don't play easier. So Pfizer is not going to play easy with a little country called Barbados, because Barbados has now revolutionized its whole approach to how it's going to do what it's going to do. If you get into manufacturing of pharmaceutical drugs or pharmaceutical products for export, you're going to come up against the weight of all weight in this world, whether they're from the United States, Canada, Germany, England, India, or even some of our colleagues in Africa. So we got to understand what that's going to cost us and how we're going to get there. The other fundamental thing is, what's the timeline? It's very ambitious. I saw in there's a 12-month period to do X, Y, and Z. But the reality is, what is the timeline that we will see a building go up, or we will see a particular chain of events as it relates to pharmaceutical production? So we will need to understand those timelines. So that's my 2 cents salvo into the world of business, because that's what I do every single day of my life, to understand what are the numbers, what will the numbers look like, how would we understand what it is that we do. I have a little thing that I do as an experiment. Every time that a piece of legislation comes to the Senate, and I'm here, I always run it through AI in relation to the appropriations or in relation to estimates. And what I'm looking for there is to see if there is any indication that the matter has been addressed, even in its widest form, as it relates to what was put into the estimates. Because if I don't see it there, I know that it's going to come up against a fiscal challenge at some point in the conversation or in its development. So that's a little pet thing that I honestly do from time to time as it relates to various pieces of legislation. This will have a fiscal challenge at some point in its development. I sincerely hope that we are able to overcome that fiscal challenge and that we are able to move it forward quickly so that we do derive all the benefits that were spoken of very, very early in the day. My second point on all of this comes down to the Barbadian in relation to acceptance. I think this was talked about earlier. Barbados is a bush country. What I call bush country, I mean a bush medicine country, okay? Barbadians move away from their doctors and follow the script of other places who purport to have
amazing
cures or wonderful cures for all sorts of ailments, right? Well, be that as it may, yes, they're very expensive, you know. Bajans always align a good product with a high price, you know. You go to a store to buy a television, and you see a television for $700, and then you see another brand television sitting there next to it, same size and everything, at $1,500, and Barbados will buy the $1,500 one, not realizing that when tech take off, all the components on the inside are the same components, but it's all to do with a little bit of that label, that prescription that is actually put there. How do we work then with the Barbadian to get the acceptance? How do we move the Barbadian forward? What would be the implications as it relates to this piece of legislation for all of those other dispensaries that crop up all over? There are some that have several outlets now in Barbados. You could go in there and you say to the young lady, I have hypertension. What can you give me for that? Now, mind you, your doctor have already put you on some form of medication. But we go in there, and the young lady does this. She opens a book, big book. This or that, which one you want? And then you hear of all the hawthorn, you hear about this, you hear about that, you hear about all of these other things. And, and yes, and that too. And we go and we buy these things. So I can see a collision, sir, as it relates to the Barbadian mindset and the future of this piece of legislation as it relates to how we actually control, because that's what the bill speaks to, controlling these areas within Barbados. What are we going to do about those other areas? The other thing that I see as a possible collision, and I may be really deep down here in left field, is the whole issue of cannabis. I may be deep in left field on this, but the reality for us now is that if we are going to talk about medical products, then we have entered into that whole area now of cannabis. and how medicinal cannabis and how we're going to treat to that and what are we going to do in these areas. So I could see the collisions coming. They're coming, you know, we're on a train, you're entering that tunnel, and there's another train coming up there real hard. Because these are some areas to me that John Public are going to be up and talking about. Yes, I do agree with my senator colleague that this is not a very sexy bill, so it does not necessarily attract the attention. But I would guarantee you by tomorrow that there will be a conversation to be had on a number of programs about what will be passed here today in relation to this. And these are some of the areas that I think we need to address in terms of a public awareness, public communication, trying to understand from the public how we're going to treat to this encompassing piece of legislation that now seeks to control, in a good way, all of what needs to happen in Barbados from a pharmaceutical perspective. And with that, sir, I will take my seat.
Thank you very much, Senator Nels. Senator Sinclair.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I want to make a very brief contribution to this debate. First of all, to congratulate the Senior Minister, the Honourable, Most Honourable Senator I'm not sure what is X business. I know it is. Senior Minister Walcott, not just for his introduction of the bill, but also the work which he has done. And I believe that the Honourable Leader of the Senate would have quite correctly given him his kudos, or give him his kudos in her presentation for the work that he did when he was minister, and then out of that role, and then into the role of senior minister responsible for the social sectors in particular. This is a very important piece of legislation, and I think members across the board and across the floor have given the importance which it richly deserves. I was particularly interested in the presentations of the three honourable independent senators. I thought they were very good presentations. I would like in particular to focus on the last presentation by Senator Niles, which I think was very good. Governments have a way of creating entities, statutory entities. And this is not an unusual exercise in this particular regard. And it ought not to be, because there are aspects of the management of our economy and society that require that we put institutions in place specifically dedicated for the purpose of managing and regulating particular sectors and disciplines. This is important. I know that has always been a kind of conflictual relationship between the central government, what central government is doing, and why government is creating all these statutory entities. Or from time to time, the financial burden of having a statutory entity does catch up with you. Because it is costly. It costs money to hire people, it costs money to put systems in place, it costs money for administrative arrangements and so forth and so on. In this instance, however, I think where the government has really come down quite correctly is that it is consolidating a number of different functions into one set of body, corporate administration, to better regulate a sector which, frankly, has a very high degree of sensitivity in the community. This issue about drugs and the kind of porousness that has developed over the years in terms of how people now can access medications and get them sent places and collect them and travel and get them and even coming into Barbados, really, importation, has to be and is of a particular central concern of this administration. And I think correctly the administration has moved with some degree of alacrity. Some may say it take too long, but we are here nonetheless to ensure that the appropriate regulatory regime is put in place to protect the public, but in this instance, not just as a regulator, to drive innovation, to, as Senator Malinu has correctly said, given a pathway for potential diversification of the economy in pretty high-value operations. And I think the twinning of those then gives us the opportunity to address Senator Niles' concern about the issues of the financing, the issues of the costs. What is it going to cost to administer this? Because he's right, there is a cost, it will cost. Their bodies, their products, their services, you have to pay for them. But there is also an opportunity for the government through the system of, you call it fees, charges, the multiplier effect of having investments go into this sector, driven by an orderly dispensation, which can be then sold and marketed to the world for bigger companies to come and to establish and so forth and so on, to create that economic value and that financial benefit that will eventually, over time, hopefully, pay for the costs associated with the exercise that we're doing. I think that's very, very important. Because in the past, what used to happen is that we have a sector, we see that it is growing, it needs some regulation, or we need to drive some particular social good, and we create an entity. And then the government now at the back end, through the Ministry of Finance, has to figure out how we're going to pay for it. So those linkages, those integrated linkages, sometimes necessarily are not there, because the assumption is government will find the money. And I think in this modern day legislative programming, it is essential that all of the necessary parties, all of the necessary inputs have to be there to ensure that when we produce or when we create entities, that we have a fairly good sense of how we're going to manage them, not this week and next month and next year, but 10 years from now. Is this going to be a fiscal burden on the public? Are we going to be able to manage it in a way that the public can see some net benefit and return? Truth is, at the end of the day, there's no better, in my own view, net return than a healthy population, or healthier population. Honourable Prime Minister likes to say, and I think quite correctly, that you have every problem in the world until you have a health problem. Then you have one problem. Then you have one problem. Because all the others pale into comparison and significance with that particular issue that you're trying to resolve. And that is why this type of administration is important, and any responsible administration, as this Barbados Labour Party is, will have to race ahead to ensure that we get in front. And why? Also, because this thing is evolving at a tremendous rate. You know, I see something they advertise on the television called, you know it better than me, GPL1, what was it, GLP1s? It sounds like a car, actually. Something from Formula 1 racing. And I know that it was 1 month or one period, it was 1 quarter, it was an injection. No, it's a pill. So soon enough, you'll be able to sniff it. But the way how the thing is moving, the way how the thing is moving, the way how the technology, seriously, but the way how the technology is moving now, it is so quick. And you're to take that, and that is going to suppress your pangs of hunger, and this is going to cause you to lose 20 pounds or 30 pounds, and you're going to be more fit. You know, some of us do it the hard way. We get on the road and walk. We restrict the diet, you know, but everything is coming now to treat something. But the reality is that whilst this is a promise, you're working on a promise of the technology that has been developed. At the end of the day, somebody expects to get paid for it. This pharmaceutical business is money. This is about money. This is about money. Don't fool yourself. Yes, maybe there's some altruism about it, and people will help you to get better if that is what happens. precisely, precisely, you know, the medication is to get you better and so forth and so on. By the end of the day, millions, billions of dollars go into these research projects. These are projects. And at the end of the project, somebody expects to recoup that money, that investment as they call it. And therefore, we have to understand that in the context of a small, vulnerable economy such as ours, who are price takers, we are taking this, because a lot of this is not being produced here. And that is why something like this is so important, because it gives the opportunity for us to release the innovation. There's a lot of bottled up innovation in this country. Honourable Senator Thompson spoke about Pearly. That's just one of the things. There's a whole lot of things. And there are young people who want to run. You have to give them a try, yes, with guardrails, to create, to innovate, and to bring things to this country that will help us make life a lot better, a lot less expensive, and more productive. And that is what this administration is trying to do. So we have to understand that. But at the same time, I want, and I support this, but at the same time, I want to make this point. I really do want to make this point. We have to be very careful not to get into this rat race about drugs and believing that the next problem, medical problem we have, or for every medical problem we can imagine, there is some drug that is going to produce a miracle outcome for us. We really need to do it. We really need to stop that. And I'm not casting any aspersions on people in the medical profession. They too have to appreciate that and get back to some. My colleague, Senator Niles, spoke about the Bush doctor. Who is it? The Bush doctor culture? The Bush people culture, you know. Well, you know, back in the days, it used to be the Bush doctor. Now it is Dr. Google. But however you look at it, you know, an ounce of protection is better than a pound of cure. And we also have to let people know that even as we put these things in place to ensure that, one, they get a constant supply of medication, two, that the medication is safe, three, that it is properly regulated, and four, of course, that they use it when they do get it, because there's a lot of misuse and underuse of medication. That too causes a problem. My understanding is that we stick to the basics. And the basics is that we eat better, we exercise, we do those things that preventative-wise, prevention-wise, allows us the capacity not to become too enamored and hooked on and have to rely on all of these drugs to survive in our daily lives. Because bringing the rates down of chronic non-communicable diseases and other illnesses that can be avoided is not going to happen by treating you, because once you get it, you got it. And unless there's a cure for that, you're going to have to manage that for the rest of your life. So if you are in a position to help prevent the incidence of it, then you would not have to rely so heavily on those medications. You may not have to go on them at all, or if you're on them, you can reduce or come off of them. And so you would not have to bear the burden on your body, your kidneys, your heart, all these things that are affected side effects, and also on your pocket, because these medications are not inexpensive. And of course, once that is added up, individual by individual, household by household, community by community, institution by institution, government then would be in a better fiscal position, because it would be spending less money on trying to hunt down all across the world to find the drugs that we need to bring it here, to then put all these fancy things in place to regulate them, to make sure that they operate in the society in the way in which they have to operate. So with those few words, Mr. President, I really want to commend this work. As I said, I was almost tempted to say that the body of work is amazing, but apparently I would have to say no pun intended, but I should, they're telling me I should stay away from that. But it has been a substantial, it is a substantial body of work, well done by the professionals. We commend them, and of course, we commend the administration for the insight and the foresight of bringing this piece of legislation to this Honourable Senate. And with that, I rest, Mr. President, in support.
Thank you very much, Senator Sinclair. Senator Most Honourable Dr. Walker, please wrap.
Thank you, Mr. President. I shall follow your instructions to the T. I first of all want to especially thank the eight honourable senators who spoke for your very positive support of the bill. Some very useful ideas and suggestions, and very stimulating debate all in all. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to some of the suggestions. There was one that I omitted when I spoke earlier in terms of the whole issue of the developments that were ongoing with the Barbados Medical Products Authority. I spoke of the Barbados Pharmaceutical Inc., the company to do the business, but I omitted the Barbados Living Lab. And I think this is what you were speaking to. The Barbados Living Lab, where I like to speak of the concept of the development of medicine and medical practice being intuitive in the 70s and the 80s, then being evidence-based in the early 20s, and at this stage in our lives, it is personalized and precision medicine based on the whole issues of the genomic sequencing. And this lab provides those facilities in Barbados. We are there. It is a living lab with the expectation that the clinicians will interact with the scientists. I'm going to make it very basic. They'll deal in terms of the genomics and genomic sequencing and how we relate that to certain diseases in this day and age. And out of that comes the research to develop biologics to treat these diseases, and in comes industry. So that is why it is called a living lab. The research, the clinical research, the research there, and the development of treatments. And that is all part of this triad of activities, so to speak, hopefully to generate something in the future. I don't know if that answers your question. Of course, the focus has to be on people who are of the same ethnic origin. I like to say that Barbados was, from the days of slavery, a very captive gene pool. Yeah, a lot of us, the Barbadians, and I said a captive gene pool, I mean that we have been interbreeding. We haven't gone anywhere. And this is important, especially in genetics, to identify certain changes, and this could be a focus of a whole new development. So that is something that we are looking at. The cost factor, very important, something that we'll be looking at. But we know it will cost. We will have to increase in terms of the most staff will be needed. That's why I deliberately said at the beginning, as part of my speech, that the Prime Minister had endorsed it in November 2023 and recognized what would be needed. So that is why I included that there. Cannabis. There was a number of things I looked at this morning. I mentioned two of them. I left out the cannabis. The cannabis already, there's an MOU, and the MOU would have to be refined with this. There's no sense for us trying to repeat what they're doing there, but certainly we have to have oversight of what they're doing. So that would be covered by basis of an MOU. In the matter of public awareness, this is important. Senator Connell raised it, and we obviously support that. In fact, in developing this process, we said at the end, we would have to have a public education campaign. Incidentally, even among some of the stakeholders, I see Dr. Hines smiling, when we had a stakeholder consultation, some of the people who work as pharmacists will actually need some, not education, but to be brought on board as to what is going to be happening. All in all, I think I have covered the main issues. Ambassador Thompson answered some for me too. Thank you. And with that, all that is left is to thank you all again for your support and to beg that this bill be now read a second time.
Thank you very much. The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye?
Aye.
Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg that you do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honourable the Senate is now in committee.
Madam Chairman, permission to call the bill in parts, please.
Permission granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 5.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 to 5 stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 through 5 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 6 to 20.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 6 to 20 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 6 through 20 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 21 to 26.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 1 to 26 stand part. 21, sorry. 21 to 26 stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 1, Part 3, clauses 21 through 26 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 27 to 30.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 27 to 30 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 27 through 30 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 31 to 42.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 31 to 42 stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 31 through 42 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 43 to 50.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 43 to 50 stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 43 through 50 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 51 to 54.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 51 to 54 stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 51 through 54 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 55 and 56.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 8, clauses 55 to 56 stand part.
The question is that Part 8, clauses 55 and 56 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 57 to 59.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 9, clauses 57 to 59 stand part.
The question is that Part 9, clauses 57 through 59 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 10, clauses 60 and 61.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 10, clauses 60 and 61 stand part.
The question is that Part 10, clauses 60 and 61 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 11, clauses 62 to 66.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 11, clauses 62 to 66 stand part.
The question is that Part 11, clauses 62 through 66 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 12, clauses 67 to 69.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 12, clauses 67 to 69 stand part.
The question is that Part 12, clauses 67 to 69 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 13, clauses 70 to 73.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 13, clauses 70 to 73 stand part.
The question is that Part 13, clauses 70 to 73 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 14, clauses 74 to 80.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 14, clauses 74 to 80 stand part.
The question is that Part 14, clauses 74 through 80 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
First schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to this bill.
The question is that the first schedule be now the first schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to this bill.
The question is that the second schedule be now the second schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Will those against please say nay? The ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to this bill.
The question is that the third schedule be now the third schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
Report.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
I beg to move, Mr. President. I beg. Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I now beg to move that the bill do now pass and be cited as the Barbados Medical Products Act 2026.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Barbados Medical Products Act 2026. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'd like to move the suspension of this sitting of the Senate for lunch until 10 minutes before 3 this afternoon.
The question is that the sitting of the Honourable Senate be suspended until 3 p.m. today. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This sitting is suspended until 3 p.m. today.